Technical Writer HQ. So give us some background of who you are with the role that you have in your company, and also and what does your company do?
Yeah, so my name is Kevin Chen. I'm a senior technical writer at Red Hat. Right now I'm working, for the Ansible Automation Platform. That's just one part of the company at Red Hat, and I do product documentation. So just technical writing toward users of the platform. Red Hat is an open source company that services a few things, but mostly they service Red Hat Enterprise Linux. So it's an OS space for companies to run their servers or whatever. And there's a few products that branch out from that. My product is Ansible, and it's one part of Red Hat. Yeah,
Yeah, a whole ecosystem to work
yeah,
on, which is
yeah.
pretty incredible. A lot of opportunity. So one of the things I'd love to hear about is how you got into technical writing. One is that technical writing isn't that known; it's still getting more known,
Hmm.
but it's definitely something that many people fall into. But some people do study it and do land a role that way and have very clear path from the beginning. So I'd love to hear your story.
But how I start? Yeah, so I'm fairly new to the role. I mean, I've really been started writing for about 4, almost 5 years at this point. And my journey into technical writing is a little weird because during my undergrad years, I did my major in history actually, so it was completely different. It was in academia, and it wasn't until I started talking to my university offered like a minor in technical communications, and I started talking to people and learned what technical writing, technical communications, medical writing, all that sort of other kind of stuff. And until I learned that the field even exists, and it appealed to me. What appealed to me is that you're able to work at a tech company, but also kind of lend add your writing skills to it, kind of write documentation. It's not something I'm used to, but as I learn more about it, it seems pretty interesting. So that's how I got into it. So really, the short answer is I just kind of stumbled upon it. It wasn't something I knew about. Yeah, like you said, it's not really written about, but I stumbled upon it. It was really cool, and I didn't really get to know it until I spoke to other writers to see what they do.
And how was that process of actually breaking into the role too? So, did you create a portfolio? Did you network with other writers? Did someone refer you in? What did that look like?
It was a mix of it was talking to writers and referrals. So again, I'm not knowing anything about the role. It was just a lot of questions about what they do, and you start build connections that way. You network with them. I mean, I had a writing background, but I didn't really have a technical background. So I pushed my skills as a communicator. I could do research. I could do interviews, and slowly kind of ease my way in. I started out as a few internships here and there, and as that went on, I started building those portfolios, and that's pretty important for a writer to break in, is to have those pieces to show that you can write for something that's a little bit more complicated, that you can, you have content strategy in mind, you have decent understanding of how to write for a user. Those kinds of skills really show when you have a portfolio. So, it's hard to get a portfolio going when you started. I know that for sure. But those opportunities come up when you network, when you know people, and when you start getting into it, you get some work out there, then people start noticing.
And then once you got into your role, did you experience any imposter syndrome? Any challenges that you came across immediately where you're like, how do I, handle these? What did that look like?
Oh yeah, yeah. The imposter syndrome is it's huge. I mean, again, we're not technical. I'm not technical, that's for sure. Coming into these roles, it is a big anxiety coming in, but being a writer also means having to embrace that, right? Like you are writing for a user, you just don't tend to know. Well, they're approaching documentation because they have questions. They might not know the technology either. So really, your job is to advocate for them. You have this unique perspective for a user who isn't quite familiar. And in some ways, it's also good that you're familiar because you're asking the right questions and you're writing the things that they need to know to use this technology. So yeah, I mean, it is difficult sometimes. You know, uh, it feels like you're writing science fiction. Sometimes you're just writing things that you know nothing about. But if you have the drive to kind of write it in its completeness. You're writing in a perspective that helps users understand it. Then you'll do fine. It's imposter syndrome is just something to embrace and something to manage. It is there, but it's kind of just part of the job.
And then were there like some challenges that came across as well, whether that be like communicating with subject matter experts or maybe understanding the tool stack that your company was using? And
Yeah.
yeah, I would
Yeah.
love also to hear about your team dynamics. Are you on a big team or is it just
Yeah.
you? How does that look?
So I've in my few years I've worked with both, right? I worked with small teams of writers. I worked just by myself in a small company. Now at Red Hat, I work with a pretty big team. So I've kind of got got a sense of how it all feels. Some of the challenges was the question. Um, it's again it's knowing what you do as a writer is to advocate for the user, and if that's what you kind of set your mind to, that's your goal. um you can kind of go off on that. Like if in the times where I was on my own, I wasn't really given a clear direction on how to structure documentation on what to write about, or how to organize the content strategy. So I just asked kind of what me as a novice of the product, what I would want to read, right? And I'll go to the product manager and I'll talk to them about, hey, it's like this is the type of questions that I would have. Does this make sense for the documentation? Have that perspective to kind of approach documentation, and it's worked out for me. In a big team that I'm working on right now, we have content strategists and managers who help with that as well. Which helps because the technology I write about now is more complicated, and I need that kind of other perspective to help guide how to approach documentation. I'm good at writing. I'm good at kind of breaking down the chunks and writing procedures, but sometimes I lose perspective of the bigger content, the strategy, and documentation needs to go, and how to organize that in a way that makes sense. That's how where you leverage your teammates, leverage our perspectives, and you kind of bounce off of each other that way. Yeah, you want to know about the tech, like the tech we use? What was that
Yeah,
question?
I would love to hear about some of the tools that you use as well, and maybe you've used different tools at different jobs, and how much of it do you feel like is also the user who uses the tools versus like the tool itself?
Yeah. In the past, I've written XML in a DITA format, so it's a modular format. And for some stuff I've written in Confluence or Google Docs, very bare bones, very pretty basic, just for internal documentation. The tools I use now at Red Hat is actually internal tools that we've developed. It's similar to DITA. It's a modular system, and then we publish it in our own internal tools as well. But for the most part, it's a modular DITA-like kind of system. It was difficult to approach. It wasn't anything I'm used to with documentation, right? I mean, like I said, I did stuff in like Confluence and Google Docs, and that's just you're writing as you see it. But sometimes with writing in a modular fashion, you gotta change the way you think about how you present information. Things that can be reused, things that it lives on its own. Sometimes in documentation, a procedure can't be dependent on something else. It needs to live on its own, and you need to write it as such. So it's a different way to think about how you present information. So that's been a bit of a challenge, but it takes just practicing, and just getting hands on those tools. That's really the best way to go about it.
And curious on how you keep up to date with everything that's happening in the industry. Do you follow any like publications, conferences, read blog articles, or do you avidly like network with other technical writers? How does that look?
I'm fortunate enough to be in a company with other writers who are who are well versed in the network and the organizations around. So in the past, I've joined SDC meetings, Society of Technical Communicators, and we have a chapter here where I am in North Carolina. And they do like seminars, and they do talks and stuff, and that's the easiest way, at least in my opinion, to get into it. But I know with some of my colleagues, they attend Write the Docs. They follow blogs and resources online. I think Write the Docs has been pretty helpful, as well as just attending SDC. Really, there's a few chapters around the country. They do a lot of seminars. That's really, personally, that's how I really got meeting writers and networking that way.
Very cool. And then
Yeah.
I just want to welcome some of the people who are in the chat, and so thank you for being here. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them. we'll go ahead and answer them. And now let's talk about some of the ways that you've been able to ensure like career growth, because you broke in and you've understood the challenges and the team dynamics, and you've worked on smaller teams, larger teams, and worked with a number of different tools. What has been sort of those underlying factors that enabled you, one, to have some industry longevity and to keep growing?
It's yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's understanding how what writers do and how to develop those skills. And it's kind of a vague answer, but at least for me, coming into it, I thought writing was the main part of it, but really it's learning how to build relationships with with subject matter experts, SMEs, with engineers, with other writers. That is one part of it, is learning how to build kind of relationships to kind of help you write and help you plan your documentation. Part of it is also another skill that I've developed is content strategy. You're writing, but how do you present that information with other information in a way that makes sense? How do you publish it? What are the formats that you want to use? That is kind of this kind of meta knowledge that you need to know, and it really isn't something that it can be taught, but really I've learned most of it just by doing and making mistakes and learning from other content strategists and writers. So those few skills beyond writing was unexpected, but it's what I've picked up over the years in my time as a writer, is just all this other soft skills that you need to know as a writer.
Okay, looks like cut out for just a brief second. We do have someone who asked a question. They said that they have been a technical translator for almost 25 years and would love to become a technical writer. Do you have any suggestions of how they would get started? So technical translator to technical writer.
So I think, like I said before, it's tough. I mean, I think a lot of the skills are parallel in terms of presenting information and doing your research and stuff like that. So those are good skills to have. The next step I would think is if there's any sort of pieces you can add to your portfolio that highlights those skills, right? Is there any? It doesn't have to be documentation, just any sort of communications, any sort of skills, any sort of portfolio pieces that show that you know how to communicate with someone more technical. You're able to communicate more complicated concepts or ideas or technologies in a way that is understandable for anybody, or any user, really. Yeah, and anything that shows that you can do your research and that you know how to do that and communicate well. So that's what I have. Hello? Hey, Josh, you there?
I'm here. Yeah, if I flag out, my internet has been having some connection issues for literally just the last hour. Feel free to keep going. And it's the way of the world of trying to do.
Oh yeah, no worries.
Yeah, very interesting though. I think one of the other things that I think that you mentioned and to place heavy emphasis on is building a portfolio. And portfolio will do so much wonders for you and where you're trying to go.
Yeah.
Now, you have at Red Hat, there's a large technical writing team, like you mentioned. Now, if you're looking to add to the team, what would be the qualities that you'd look for in a technical writer? Because many of the people watching this video are looking to break into their first role.
Yeah. Interesting question. I'm fortunate enough to work in a really strong team right now. I love the people I work with, and the thing that really stands out to me is even nothing to do with the skills. Is that they come in with a lack of ego. I work with experienced writers, inexperienced new junior writers, but they've all come with a willingness to learn, because one, you're writing for technologies that most of us wouldn't use as a user, just at home, just coming in with ability to learn. Everyone even experienced writers, they've used tools in the past, but every company works differently. For example, at Red Hat right now, we have internal tools, but we push it to GitHub and we publish it, with other internal procedures. So, it's you need to be flexible, not just in the way you work, but also the technology you're working with. And with the over my years, the writers who I've enjoyed working with the most have that exhibit that behavior, right? They're coming in with obviously they're bringing in their skills from the past. That's important, but they're not letting it shape the way they're working, right? They're eager to learn, and they also want to maybe try to add to the process too. They're coming with experience. They have a suggestion on like, hey, it doesn't make sense that we're publishing this way. Could we, think how we're publishing, or could we think how to better receive user feedback? That willingness to contribute and willingness to learn is important more important to me than any other like concrete skills for a writer.
And one of the things that someone brought up in the comments is that the importance of finding a mentor. Is that something that you placed emphasis on? It seems like already in your environment, you have a lot of experienced writers to bounce ideas off of. Was there ever a time that you felt like you needed a mentor or, reached out?
Certainly in the beginning, like as you're networking, I've latched on to a few writers that I felt like were in similar positions for me in the past, of like being completely new to writing and seeing where they've come, where they've the journey they've taken. I've wanted to know more about how they do it. So mentors are pretty important. I work with a great manager right now who she had a past of working with contracting and freelancing herself, and that's how she built a lot of her skills. And eventually she's now my manager. She works at Red Hat as a manager. She's taught me a lot about how to advocate for yourself as a writer, because if you're on a small company and you're one of two writers, no one understands what you do. You need to advocate for what you can do and what your limits are, and do it that way. So other than that, I've had mentors in the past. I have a degree. I have a master's degree for technical communications. So I studied a bit of that in academia, and one of my professors there, he's been a great resource about kind of the research that goes into technical communication and what companies are looking for, in terms of a writer, in terms of the skills and some of the soft skills that you might need to break in.
Yeah, I think, you can find those mentors early on, and just like you're saying, like they could even be like your professor. And also I think the big thing is just reaching out and establishing the connection and not expecting them to always do that.
Yes.
Which I feel like people have a tendency to do. They're like, if I put out enough goodwill into the universe, it will come back to me. I'm like, sometimes goodwill comes in the form of asking, and establishing that relationship too. You got to be proactive for sure.
Yes. Yeah, that makes sense.
And would love to hear about what you think the future of technical writing holds. I know this is a big question because there's a lot of different things here. You have different tools that are coming out. You have also lots of different new technology industries. You have AI that's trying to work its way into copywriting and blog writing and maybe eventually into technical writing. When you think about the future of technical writing, what comes across your mind?
Less so about kind of, based on what I know. I think I've learned, in the past few years, I've gotten more used to DITA, more used to modular writing, single source authoring. And as I understand it, that's not the way it's done in the past. In the past, the IBM comes up with a big old book and it's, you got to read it from one way to the other, but that's really not the way, we get information, right? If I have a problem with my iPhone or whatever, I'm going to Google the exact problem and I get a small chunk of what it is. And that's how people approach documentation. No one's really reading for fun. You're reading small chunks of what's important, which is why I think the modular and single source authoring is important. If that's not the way an industry is right now, I think that's where it should be going, because that is a more manageable, a lot more user-friendly way to present documentation. Whether or not AI, whatever, can accomplish all that, I can't really speak to that. At least for me as a writer, I think a modular the modular approach to documentation is better for us as writers, it's easier to manage, and it presents information in a way that makes sense to the users the most.
Yeah, I think, a great example is how many people read through the entire handbook that comes with their car that they buy, right? You have maybe like a 200-page handbook, and then you read it all, and you're like, what did I even get out of this? I don't remember any of it. It'd be nice if you could just maybe ask the car, you're like, hey, maybe type in a question somewhere. And I think we're getting to that point, and probably a number of cars that already have this. It'll just tell you exactly what you need to do, right? It's like, how do I sync this to my iPhone or whatever it may be? And I think what you're saying, happens in many formats. So whether it be a car, whether it be through like a knowledge base or external or internal, I'm a big believer, and I agree with you. That's where the industry is going. I think it also has to do with people's attention spans too, are helping push this forward. Is that people can't read like several pages anymore. They just can't do it. They just want their question answered, and that's it. They're like, don't give me any more of that.
It makes sense, right? If you're in trouble, I'm not in trouble, but if you're like having trouble with your technology, you don't really need to read like rambling preambles about content. You just want procedures, and they're just going to go. They're not going to sit around reading it. So that makes sense.
Yeah, very true. And I know we talked a lot about many different things here today. Is there anything else that you feel like new technical writers and people looking to break into technical writing should know to, one, make sure that happens, and two, succeed on the job?
It's kind of just started for me, as in my writing career. And I know what it feels like coming from just trying to break in. You don't have any pieces to show. You don't have any things that demonstrate that you are a good writer. And I was in that position like not too long ago, and it's tough, and I get it. But it's really about putting yourself out there, like we talked about before, finding those networks, and if it doesn't lead anywhere, it's fine. But eventually, it's gonna get somewhere. But also knowing how to market your skills. Technical writing isn't just about writing. It's like I said, it's about the soft skills, about knowing how to interview or do your research, advocate for user friendliness, UX, all that. There's a way to market yourself and kind of put that in your resume, having pieces, putting anything in your portfolio that shows a little bit of that, and getting there. So, people talk about certifications and stuff like that. That's important, but I think in the end, it's just understanding the soft skills that a writer needs, and then using that to push your career, and then the writing experience will follow.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Thank you so much, Kevin, for being here with us today and helping out all the different people who are looking to break into technical writing and succeed. And with that said, we'll go ahead and rock and roll and go from here.
All right. Thank you so much.